Time waits for no man. Dancing with the devil, trying not to lose my balance. Why you see him living in the moment? Gotta own it. Time breathing, now you breathe it from the gun blast. See your whole life in the flash.
So we were finally blessed with Joey Badass's new album, but it was delayed due to some copyright issues. Couldn't get the clearance on a couple of samples closer to the deadline. That's why I wanted to create this video today. We're going to look at creating an instrumental out of stock or free instruments so that you don't run into the same issues. This video is packed with freebies and tips that I haven't covered in other episodes, so do make sure you hit that like button. Let's jump into it. Okay, so in this episode, we're actually taking inspiration from Joey Bada's single, Head High. If you're looking to create a track that sounds like it's sampling more of a jazzy record, then I suggest you take a look at the link in the top right after this episode. In that video, I break down arrangement styles and how you can resample yourself, all from stock instruments. It will make sure that you have a lot of folks asking you where you got the sample from. I promise you for that. Okay, so here is my project. And before we get started, there's a few instruments that I've downloaded from Ableton's packs. So what you want to do is come over to packs here and you want to look through some of the packs that they have for free. One of the instruments that we're going to look at first is the upright piano from Spitfire Audio, and the second instrument that we're going to look at is the orchestral woodwinds. If you can't find them in packs, then just go to ableton.com/n/packs and search the free packs that they have available. Okay, so the first thing that I started with is the piano. I wanted to create something that sounded similar to Head Higher by Joey Badass. So I figured why not start off with a very similar chord progression, and then we'll change the arrangement later in terms of the flute, the drums, and the other accompanying instruments. So we're starting off with similar chords: D minor, G minor 7, E minor 11, and then E minor 7. The first chord and third chord starting on the bar line, but we're going to get a little bit of a pushed fill with the second and fourth chords that just play ahead of the bar line a little bit. It's going to give that on-beat, off-beat feel and a place for your kick to sit as well. So remember that later when we start placing our drums. This is the only instrument that's being sent to a return track here. So I've got this piano hall preset and I've just changed the size and the decay a little bit, 100% wet. And then that's going to make sure that we have a little bit of reflection going on with the piano as well. Just fill up that space. Now I did want the piano to sound a little bit more realistic. So as well as EQing it and adding that return track, I've also added my free plugin, which you can make yourself. I've got an episode on it. And that device is called Strum. It just allows you to add the arpeggiator to make sure that you can roll or strum chords a little bit more realistically so that all your chords aren't block notes. You can even add the velocity device so you can randomize the velocity a little bit. So when we add that device, it sounds a little bit more like this. Now to my ears, it sounded like the piano was being accompanied by like a whirly or an organ sound. So that's what I've done. I've just chosen the stock organ softer preset. I don't think I've changed any of these settings. Same chords as we heard before. I'm actually using the chorus ensemble and the EQ to make it a little bit less harsh, so it just sits under the piano. It's a little bit more muffled now. I've taken out some of those mids. I've also used the utility. What I'm doing is automating the gain when you first hear each of the chords. Now, tell me if there's a better way of doing this. You can see how I've automated this. And originally my idea was to tie the shaper to the gain, but I realized that's going to go on a grid of 4 or 8 or 16 or however I set it. But it's not actually going to be triggered by the MIDI hit. If you have a better way to do this, do let me know, because I feel like I'm being a little bit dense here. Now I noticed in head high we had some floor noise, or almost like some grain delay on the piano. I wanted to replicate that with a stock instrument. You've seen how I replicate floor noise using the claustrophobic piano. If not, check out some of my previous episodes in the last couple of weeks. So to do this, what I did was just use the Whispering Strings preset. It comes with all of these audio effects at the end. I haven't really touched them, so I'm not going to speak on them now, but I did, however, add the EQ8 just to get rid of this resonance and boost the highs a little bit, and add a gate which is tied to my piano here, and just automate the gain a little bit. This makes that floor noise sound like this. So the floor noise is only occurring when the piano notes are played. That's how it's triggered. So when I play all three together, it's not too noticeable, but if you have some headphones, you might be able to hear some of that kind of buzzy, dusty resonance. Now, one of the instruments you probably heard in head high playing an accompanying melody is probably the panpipe flute. We don't really have an instrument like that in Ableton. You can make something similar, but it sounds a little bit more electronic with wavetable, with operator. So as I mentioned in the beginning of the video, what I've done is just added the free woodwind orchestra from PAX, and that's going to sound like this. The closest instrument I had was the piccolo solo staccato. Now I'm switching up the arrangement because we don't want to just copy head high like for like. We want to take inspiration for it, hence the name of the channel. So I'm going to play this melody towards the end of the bar. That it does sound similar, but it's not as breathy as the instrument in head higher. So what I've done is added a second woodwind instrument. This is the woodwind ensemble staccato. And you can see that I've really boosted the highs there to get more of that breath sound. So we're getting some of the wind there. And I've also added the short spiccato strings from the string orchestra, and I've really boosted this resonance here. It's not super noticeable. It's just going to help it pull out of the mix a little bit more. Those three together sound like this. And let's play it with the rest of the instruments. Awesome. I'm happy with that, and I could hear kind of like a glockenspiel sound in head higher. I wanted to accompany it with something similar, but once again, the stock instruments in Ableton aren't great. So I'm going with more kind of glassy vibraphones, and I'm using the plastic kalimba to pull out the transient clicking noise. So with the vibraphone, we get this sound. Keeping it all within the key of that D minor. And I'm just adding the reverb and a little bit of the EQ8. You can see with the plastic kalimba, I don't have reverb, and I'm just boosting the highs, and that plastic kalimba is going to be really subtle. I might have to turn it up here for you guys. So again, that's just going to give it a more of a kind of thumb-picked tone to the vibraphone. And then we move on to the operator. I noticed that the Joey Badass song, we kind of had that West Coast mono synth feel, and it felt just like a sine wave. So I just added the operator with a lot of attack here. And I've actually added a device that I probably haven't mentioned on the channel for like a year or more. I created an episode on why you don't need to download Kyle Beats Drip plugin, and I created the Drip Off, just a free alternative that replicates some or all of the presets here. Once again, you can find it at my Patreon. This is just changing the sound of the operator a little bit. So originally we have this. And the Drip Off is just giving it a little bit more of a reverbious kind of chorus effect. Now I just duplicated that operator underneath, added a line delay to make it a little bit wider in the mix, and the chorus ensemble set to vibrato. I've turned that amount right down to 9% and the rate almost all the way up. And then I'm playing this operator an octave higher at D4 than the previous operator. This is once again to pull it out the mix a little bit and add just that kind of octave jump. So it almost has that theremin kind of effect now. I noticed in head high, and this is replicated in loads of hip hop tunes, just that one string note that is played throughout. So we're copying the root note of the song. So we've got this D playing in a higher octave, D6 here and D5, and that just plays throughout. I've actually chosen an electronic string, the Cruiser Strings preset from Ableton Live 11, and I'm just adding the EQ8. It's so low in the mix that you don't really notice this is an electronic string, but something that I did put underneath it, which I'm quite happy with, is some vocals. We're using vocal samples or vocalists all the way through Joey Bada's 2000 album. How do we add vocals for free if we're not a member of Splice, we're not a singer ourselves? Well, don't forget that Ableton has a bunch of demo vocals that is used inside synths and stuff. Just type in vocal and head to packs, and then under core library, you'll find both vocal loops and one shots. I'm using this Reverb 2 L10 demo vocal. And it was actually in a great key, so I haven't really done anything with it other than stretch it and fade it between two samples and then let it end there. It gives that kind of sample feel to it. Let me turn this up. You can see that I've EQ'd that vocal and used a line delay again to make it a little bit wider. So we put that in the mix with the strings. Let's turn that down and listen to where it sits at the minute. I just want to interrupt this episode real quickly to tell you about today's sponsor. Of course, that's DistroKid. Actually, it's DistroVid. DistroKid have just launched their sister company DistroVid, which is an amazing platform to distribute your music videos. We're talking about getting your music videos on platforms like Vivo, Tidal, Apple Music, YouTube, and more. Now, unlike DistroKid, DistroVid is going to be $99 per year, but I promise you from experience, you're going to pay way more than that just trying to get your music videos on Vivo and other platforms manually. People have been begging DistroKid to do this for some time now, so I'm really glad to see that it's finally here. But don't worry if you're not there. If you've just started making beats and you're thinking about releasing your music, I've still got you. Make sure you use that link in the description below as you'll get 7% off your first year on DistroKid. It's a brilliant way to release your music. I've been using it for years and I've never had a bad word to say. Let's get back to this video. Okay, so I did take a little bit of a liberty with the drums, but they are free, or they will be. So the drums came from my upcoming Hushchild sound pack. This one's gonna be on kind of a boom bap tip. If you head to the Patreon, you can get an early scoop of the one shots, and you can of course download all the samples and the project that we're seeing in this video. So let me turn off all the plugins and then we'll come back to the processing. The kick sounds like this. Originally, it was a little bit more full with some static noise, and we're just making it more in keeping with kind of the subtle boom bap feel of Joey Badass's track. Second thing that I did was add the hats. We've got one hat just playing on the downbeat. Just making sure that it's very subtle. I've got a really tiny fade at the beginning there and fading it out towards the end. And you'll notice that I've moved the hats back a little bit. It's going to give it more of a lazy feel. I've got these really subtle hats underneath that first downbeat just to give it a really quiet kind of ghost note rolling 16th feel. Play the hats together. And then I've got two snare samples. The first snare sounding like this, more of a metal clap sound, the first snare. I've set this one quite wide and EQ'd the bass out of it. The second snare, I've chopped off the beginning. I've rolled that off, given it a little bit more bassy presence, and then I've put the hats and the snares in a group. Again, another free device that you can download from Max for Live. I'll leave it in the description below. I've covered it in previous episodes. This is just to make sure that when I add this glue compressor preset, it's not adding any more volume. And then I've got the EQ8 just to reduce some of that high end that's added afterwards. So beforehand, my tops would have sounded like this. And then with the glue compressor and EQ, it sounds like this. So it's got a little bit more brightness, a little bit more aggression there now. And then finally, what I did with the entire group was just make it sound a little bit more gritty. I kept going back and forth to head higher to listen to the comparison. And my drums just sounded a little bit more dull and not as present, not as bit crushed. So I added the EQ8 to roll off some bass, this compressor to really drive the sound of the drums. I've added the saturator and then my low-fi device, which you can grab from the Patreon, to add a little bit of noise, a little bit of filter and a little bit of bit crush in there to make sure that it sounds kind of like, again, a bit sampled. Then we're coming to the latter part of the track, kind of an afterthought is the bass. With the bass, I'm using this stock preset, basic fine line bass. I've just brought the filter and reso down a little bit. I've added more of an attack, and I think I changed the fine and coarse pitch of one of these oscillators, so it didn't warble around as much, and so it was definitely in key with the rest of my music. On top of this, I've increased the dynamic tube and added this cabinet and glue compressor. This is doing the most work to pull it out of the small speakers. If I play the bass now and turn that off, it just sounds a little bit wider and a tiny bit softer. So that cabinet is putting it in mono, and the glue compressor is pushing it to a volume range. So it kind of stays at that same dynamic volume. I'm trying to make sure that I play amongst my other melodies with the bass. Now, finally, I felt like I needed a little bit of vinyl noise, a little bit of static. But since I've seen you last, I've actually been in New York and traveling down the East Coast of the US. The White House is over here. There he is. Then over here, it's Independence Day. Over this way, that's where Lincoln sits. And then this big boy, massive, America. I've completed it, buddy. So whilst I was traveling around, I recorded so many sounds on my phone to use in later recordings. I know that Joey Badass is a New York kid, so why not use the sounds of New York in this recording? Now, originally this recording sounded like this. But that's going to be a little bit too distracting with all the talking that's in there. So you know what I do with my samples, I make sure that I reverse them. Any talk in there is still going to sound humanistic. You're still going to have all the sounds, but it's not going to be distracting to the listener for them to tune into other conversations. I've also added the EQ8, really tight and high telephone EQ there to kind of construe those frequencies. Makes it a little bit more white noise like. And then to push that white noise sound even further, I've added the vocoder with the carrier as noise, and then I've drawn this curve again to boost some of those highs and brought the formant down, increased the attack, and brought that depth down just 1% as well. So it's a little bit more subtle with the vocoder. And then I'm finally sidechaining that to the kick, so it's not always ever present. Let's have one final listen to this track so you can get a feel of it in its entirety. And don't forget that you can jump over to the Patreon to download the entire project, the stems, the samples, anything that I've mentioned, from the lo-fi to the drip off to the strum effects rack, to help you in your projects in future. So there we have it, guys. What did you think of Joey Badass' new album now that we finally have it? Did it live up to your expectations? Did it exceed them? Why? Why not? I would absolutely love to know. And whilst you're there, as always, let me know what you want to see in future videos. Once again, I thank you so much for stopping by. Consider hitting that subscribe button, and I'll see you next time.